And welcome to Scientist.com's Understanding Animal Welfare Best Practices in Asia Pacific for Biotech and Pharma. We appreciate your attendance at this, our second webinar in the series. And I'm joined today by Dr. Danyi Wen, the founder, president, and CEO of Shanghai Lidi. I'm really excited to introduce her to you later. But for now, I'd like to tell you just a tiny bit about myself. My name is Megan, and I'm the Senior Category Director for In Vivo and GLP Services at Scientist.com, and I will be presenting to you today. So I'm just going to get started by explaining a little bit about why we're here and talking about this today. What does Scientist.com have to do with animal welfare? Well, we're actually a solution for outsourcing research. We work with 140 plus research organizations of all sizes in a marketplace of over 4,000 suppliers. And that means that some of those suppliers are offering in vivo services, and animal welfare is critical for the workflows and compliance when we are outsourcing live animals work. Our platform was built by scientists and for scientists, so we do like to really make sure that we are on top of compliance and make sure that you're sourcing ethically and correctly according to your organizational goals, but not having to know who to copy it on an email, who you need to get approval from. So we can build all that right in for you and make it really easy to complete all of your projects. If you joined us last time, you can bug out here for a moment, but I would like to just give you a really quick recap. So our last session was about North America and understanding best practices there. So we talked a lot about how the relationship with animals historically in North America has had more of a utilitarian aspect. So as European settlers arrived, agriculture became more prominent and this utilitarian view kind of persisted. But early animal protection societies started to appear in the 19th century. They were often driven by concerns about the treatment of working animals, such as these horses. And then this further advanced through the early 20th century with the publishing of books like Silent Spring and Animal Machines, and some of the publicity that surrounded biomedical research. So this picture is of Pepper the dog in an article from Life, and it really was a catalyst for a lot of animal welfare change. We covered Canada, the United States, and Mexico as far as the federal legislation and requirements. And then we also heard from Megan LaFollette at the 3RC and Diana at Certus. So today we're going to follow a little bit of a similar path, and we're going to start with the background of animal welfare legislation in Asia Pacific. So I'm really excited to tell you about this today. Of course, Asia Pac is a huge region, so we can't cover everything, but we're going to focus on countries where our clients and our suppliers work the most frequently. China, India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and a little bit in New Zealand. The New Zealand one is interesting, but there's a lot of sheep there, which means there's a fair amount of animal health work that goes on. The history of animal welfare in Asia Pac is quite different from North America, where I talked about us having a utilitarian outlook on animals in North America specifically. The cultural and religious traditions in many of the Asian countries have really emphasized compassion and respect for all living beings, which includes animals. So those principles really shaped traditional practices and animal welfare rules and law. Hinduism is a really great example of this. It establishes a principle of nonviolence, and it's kind of a cornerstone of ethics. And that harm to any living being generates bad karma. That has consequences. So a lot of people who follow Hinduism are actually vegetarian. And another of the Eastern religions, Jainism, was founded, it's one of the world's oldest religions in India over 2,500 years ago. And they adhere to animism, which means they view all natural life entities as living and sacred. So obviously their animal welfare thoughts and rules and laws kind of come from that. So they take measures to minimize unintentional harm, even to like the smallest species, even to insects. Another that you may be really familiar with that kind of formed this tradition and this history is Buddhism. So the first precept of Buddhist teachings is a fundamental ethical guideline, and it's to refrain from taking life. So that view on animals equates killing animals with killing humans. And most Buddhists don't consume farm animals. They place value on a better life and good welfare for those animals. And interestingly, they've always viewed animals as sentient, which is quite different from some of the Western religious traditions and some of the things that we talked about in the North American session. A lot of the back and forth about animal behavior and the arguments about sentience didn't really occur in this area. Islam is another great example of this. So followers are taught that Allah has granted power over animals, but there's an emphasis of the responsibility to treat animals well. And that's part of your obedience to Allah's will. So unnecessary harm, things like hunting for pleasure instead of food, any form of cruelty towards animals is disobedience. And they are actually taught that animals should only be killed out of necessity. So this is another really good example of why the history of animal welfare in this region kind of started a little bit earlier and was formed in a different way than the utilitarian driven legislation of North America. So one of the first laws actually around animal welfare or well-being was a ban on meat consumption in Japan in 675. So that was around for quite a bit. It waned and waxed. It was reintroduced in the 1600s. It was finally repealed in the 1800s, due mostly to Western influence. But then other countries started enacting laws to prevent cruelty to animals. You can see Malaysia did so in 1910, which is a very early example. If you remember the Animal Welfare Act from America, we were at least 50 years behind this. India as well introduced the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in 1960. And right after that, something really interesting happened. There was some actual global legislation. So the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, you might know that as CITES, that is still enacted today. It regulates shipping of our samples and all sorts of things that you have to have permits for. There's also a whaling commission ban on commercial whaling around this time. So you can see it's really starting to grow in the global kind of marketplace and legislative like aspects. So China actually instituted as well a statute on the administration of laboratory animals in 1988. And then more recently, there was a ban on cosmetic testing in India, which you may recall Mexico also recently did. And in New Zealand in 2015, they amended their animal welfare bill, which actually finally legally recognized animals as sentient beings. So taking the things that were thousands of year old religious beliefs and traditions and things that most people largely feel today and actually codifying that into law, which is a really interesting change from the way that we've seen things go before. It was more around protecting them from harm and not really about them as sentient beings themselves. So today we have a lot of challenges in this area, and in a little while I will go through kind of the current status, but it can be really challenging to change animal welfare, to make progress. And so I'm really interested in seeing what you think is the biggest challenge. So I've read a couple different things, but read the rapid economic development in some of these countries has led to a lot of increased industrialization and urbanization. So what happens is that those are challenges for animal welfare because there's intensive farming and lack of regulation. There's inadequate enforcement in some areas, and that leads to concerns about the treatment of not just laboratory animals, but also obviously farm animals. So the legal status of animal welfare, it also varies widely across the region, across countries, across states, other things like that. And some of the countries have comprehensive animal welfare laws, but others may have limited or no specific legislation that addresses that issue. So the enforcement of the existing law also varies, and it affects the overall effectiveness of animal protection measures. So there are several international organizations like World Animal Protection, the World Health Organization, that work with governments and local organizations in this region to address animal welfare issues, especially when they're related to things like zoonotic disease and the human-animal relationship. So now I'm going to take a moment and go on to talk about the current status in these areas. And as you might recall, we had a specific list of countries that we're going to cover. And I'm going to start with Australia, just at the beginning. We'll alphabetize them. So Australia is really interesting because while there is like an overall law for the federal government, the really predominant legislation is actually state or territory legislation. And these started being put into place in the late 70s and early 80s. And the governing kind of the guide in Australia is a little bit different. It's the Australian Code for the Care and Use of Animals for Scientific Purposes. They call it the code there. And I'll go into that in a little more detail, what the differences are between all of the different countries, but each Australian state and territory has its own legislation, and those may each include specific provisions that are related to the use of animals in research. But the researchers and the institutions have to comply with federal and the state and territory regulations. So it's possible for some states to have more stringent requirements than others. And they're mostly overseen by institutional animal ethics committees. They call them AECs there. In China, the regulations for the administration of laboratory animals, I believe, started in 1988, but has been updated several times since then. The standard for the care and use of laboratory animals and the guidelines on the ethical review of laboratory animal welfare are available. So China doesn't really have a comprehensive standalone national law that's specifically dedicated to laboratory animal welfare, but the welfare and use of animals in research are addressed through kind of a combination of laws, guidelines, and regulations, similar to what we talked about in the United States with the interaction of the Animal Welfare Act and the guide and OLAW and things like that. So the key considerations here kind of include the animal welfare is addressed in broader terms within provisions of laws, like there's one called the Animal Epidemic Prevention Law and the Wildlife Protection Law, and then the guidelines and regulations that are put out by the Ministry of Science and Technology. And you can find English translations of all of this. I showed one right here, but I will share all of these resources and things at the end of the webinar series if you would like links to them. So in China, the institutional body is the IACUC, just like we have here in the US, but there can also be similar bodies, obviously. Moving on to India. This one was really surprising to me. I did not realize that India passed the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act way back in 1960. They followed that up with the transport of animal rules. There's rules about experimentation on animals, obviously, and more recently, a ban on cosmetic testing. So the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act and the Breeding and the Experiments on Animals Act, those outline the ethical principles for the use of animals in experiments, and they establish the Committee for the Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments on Animals, the CPC-SEA, and institutions that are conducting animal research are required to attain approval from that group. So they have to ensure compliance with the ethical standards and the 3 Rs. And researchers and institutions in India are encouraged to follow those regulations, prioritize welfare, and engage in ethical practices, obviously. So this information will all be available for you as well. Japan is another really interesting example. Laboratory animal welfare there is primarily regulated by the Act on Welfare and Management of Animals. And that law sets really basic standards for the humane treatment of animals, including those in research. It means that institutions that are conducting research are typically required to establish an IACUC to review and oversee their research. And they also emphasize the 3 Rs, replacement, reduction, and refinement. Researchers and institutions there are really encouraged to adhere to some of these guidelines and notifications, or required that they come from the Ministry of the Environment, and they will put out specific guidelines and different, basically like white papers that are guidance for specific situations. In South Korea, the primary legislation addressing animal welfare is the Animal Protection Act. The law is basically preventing cruelty to animals. So, if you recall before, we talked about how law in North America tends to be prevention of cruelty and the utilitarian view versus a view of like sentience and things like that. And that's how this really kind of started out with the original versions of this law. It outlines specific offenses that are related to animal cruelty and gives like specific penalties for those violators, which I thought was a really interesting addition to really lay that out. The provisions include regulation on care, transport, slaughter, and emphasize minimizing the suffering of animals. And they've actually made a lot of updates to this recently. There was just an update to the Animal Protection Act in 2023, and they've recently banned the sale and production of dog meat as well. So there's a lot happening right now with animal welfare in South Korea, and I expect that we will be seeing a lot of development soon. They also banned cosmetic testing as well. So I believe that came out in 2016, but was not effective until 2018. But they are kind of right on the heels of everybody, and as far as like the latest in animal welfare legislation. And finally, the last one is New Zealand. I really enjoyed this one just because I particularly love kiwis, and I noticed that the New Zealand ministry, they put out their good practice guide, basically their guide for laboratory animals, and they had a kiwi on there, which I thought was really fun. And that's actually because their good practice guide also covers wild species that people are working with out in the field. And obviously in New Zealand, with kiwis being so critically endangered and so many problems with invasive species, that's a really important and key piece of guidance for them to have. So the welfare of laboratory animals is covered by the Animal Welfare Act from 1999. That mandates establishment of animal ethics committees, the AECs, for reviewing and approving research proposals, and they also emphasize the 3 Rs. It prohibits causing unnecessary pain or distress, and it requires adherence to the codes of welfare. So they do need to adhere to the good practice guide here, and they need to place responsibility on the individuals that are in charge of laboratory animals. So it's not just the overall organization, but the individuals working with animals specifically. And the compliance with this is through inspections, and there's a focus on things like promoting humane endpoints and ethical treatment in laboratory animal research. So New Zealand is kind of got a similar guide to what we would expect, and actually references the guide in some situations, but it's a little more comprehensive as far as wildlife research. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Dr. Danny Wen to introduce herself. She, again, is the founder, president, and CEO of Shanghai Lidi Biotech. And Lidi is a wonderful partner to Scientist.com. They've been a supplier with us for quite some time. And I'm so thrilled that she's here to talk about their animal welfare practices in a practical application setting.
Thank you, Megan, for the introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here to join this discussion. As Megan mentioned, and we have been work with Scientist.com for many years, and really benefit from their pay a lot of attention to the animal welfare stuff. So Megan gave the very comprehensive introduction of the animal welfare in the Asia Pacific different country. In the next few slides, and I like to take the Lidi's practice as the example, and how we carry out the daily practice, follow the highest international standard at the animal fair. So those give you as the example, and from CRO point of view, and how we practice and implement those 3R principle in the daily practice. Let me me give the full screen. Yeah. So, and I'm going to first give the quick intro about the Lidi Biotech. Then we using Lidi as the example to elucidate how CRO in China doing the care and the use of the lab animals. Then we also give some like about the animal welfare legislation practice in China, and also happy to answer the questions. So Lidi is a CRO focused on the translational medicine. So the feature of us is we kind of have a two end. So first part on the 2B business, we are preclinical CRO, and we have over 1,900 PDX models. Many of those are derived from the patient that has been using different drug and developed drug resistant. And we were able to get the sample to build those drug resistant model. And we also run many CDX model and some matching PDX organoid cell lines. And for the immuno-oncology part, we also run many IO model. And overall, we have delivered over like 1,800 project global-wise. So that's the 2B part. Then since we are focused on the translational work, we also have a subsidiary company called Shanghai Lidi. We developed our own patented technology called Mini PDX. Literally, this in vivo version of the organoid IC. So we're using those technology and to support personalized oncology at the hospital. At the same time, we also using this technology to on the drug screen that significantly reduce the amount of the animal was needed for the study. So those are unique setting. We have both the 2C session and the 2B session that enable us to have work together with hospital to providing many translational support. Overall, we have 3 animal facilities and on the Shanghai Lidi, Xian Lidi, and Liwen. They all ELEC accredited. Also, were honored and during the COVID-19, and we kind of other client is difficult to send the people come over and verify. Actually, it's the program from scientist.com. So we are one of the first a company was get verified by the scientist.com on 2022. And our central lab is also US CAP certified. So this is slide summary of what we do, and we focus on the pharmacology part, doing the in vitro and the in vivo pharmacology studies, and also we have the orthotopic model and the many metastasis model, and a lot of project is on the immuno-oncology part. We also have autoimmune models. And since we're doing the translational work, many company join those mini PDX mouse trial with fresh patient sample. Together with those omics and the bioinformatics, we're providing many support for the translation medicine side, especially for the clinical indication identification and also biomarker. And come to the clinical part, we also offer the GLP-like central lab that was US CAP certified, so we can support clinical sample testing. And we have established many drug-resistant model with those through the reverse engineer strategy. We also have a target identification and validation platform. As you can see, the central business is the pharmacology part. So we're heavily involved in the animal work, but the majority is on the rodent. So in the next few slides, we're going to share how we operate the animal welfare and in our daily practice. So speak of the functional diagnosis and people like how we know that at the beginning when people talking about the precision medicine, more referral to the sequencing. But back to many years ago, in the 2018, JAMA already published a paper. They confirmed that so all the cancer, only 15% with clear cancer driver gene. Patient that they benefit from NGS at clinic is only 6.6%. So naturally, people are going to ask the question, besides the sequencing, what else we can do? And back to 2016, NCI summarized what people are using and on the functional diagnosis, so-called three functional diagnosis. And the first one is conditional reprogramming. Initially, starting from the Georgetown University, Richard Schlegel's lab. You adding the feeder cell, so you can bring those conditional reprogram clone, and adding the matrigel, you can run in the in vitro organoid. And the golden standard is the PDX. So those the thing and the people extensively use in the drug discovery. First two belong to the in vitro, and the golden standard for IND filing, you have to go to the in vivo. But when we're doing the translational use, we found out that there's a limitation doing the in vitro assay, because if you're giving the drug and ex vivo, and that cannot really mimic the drug metastasis procedure. So we developed a in vivo version of the organoid assay. We named that mini PDX. Specifically is we get a fresh patient sample, usually is from the biopsy sample or some surgery sample. We prepare the cell suspension and we seal into a mini capsule and implemented the capsule into the mice. So in this way, and we can give in the drug systemically. So for each treatment, we're going to put in 6 capsules in 2 mice. And after 7 days systemic dosing, we take out the capsule and we run in the cell titer-glow. So by nature, this is still the organoid assay, but since it's in the mini capsule, we can give in the drug systemically in those. And that first, it is the in vivo assay, but it's only take 7 to 10 days. The application beside the chemo drug, that's typically doing the in vitro, and in those in vivo version, you also can test those target drug, angiogenesis drug, specifically for the ADC drug, PROTAC drug, and the IO version, we also can do the IO drug. The sample needed is usually from the biopsy or the pleural effusion or from the surgery. Once we get the sample, within 24 hours, we're going to give the QC report. If we have enough the cell, later on the successful rate is 100%, because they all can proliferate well within the mice. Is instead of putting in the CO2 incubator, we're using the mice as the incubator. So we have been running those patented technology for over 10 years. We carry out many investigator-initiated trial on different cancer type with many hospital PI. As of today, and the 29 is a mini PDX related ACI publication. Highest impact factor is 46.3. There's no non-papers impact factor over 10. Average impact factor is 9.6. All that publication is in our website. Welcome people to download. So for those in vivo study, also significantly reduced the animal we used. So it serves as the intermediate between the in vitro and the fully PDX in vivo. Because of those work and the ALEC, they have those so-called global 3R rewarding. Each year they select one at US North America, one from Europe, one from whole Asia. So we we were very lucky to select as the one of the winner for Asia Pacific area on those these global 3R rewards. So the overall summary is we get a fresh patient sample. We can do the in vitro organoid, and we also can do the in vivo, those mini PDX organoid assay. And we also take the same sample. We can do the omics data and doing the K-cell for DNA, K-cell for RNA. And so we can do the omics analysis with the same sample. And we also have the image mass cytometry in one perfect block slide. We can simultaneously staining 35 markers. So this is technology from Fluidam. And we also put everything into our PMED trial database. And in order to standardize the operation, we also prepared a machine. So making those mini pack sample preparation can be automated. So specifically for those 18,000 of the PMED PDX model, we all put in the PMED trial database, that including the clinical treatment history and also the efficacy data, and for standard of care the drug. And the whole system was operated by the BIMs and the LIMS, and also that are associated with RNA-seq and the whole exome sequencing and the pathology data. So from those, and the people can free log in on this database, searching for the model meet their criteria. The application of this database also very helpful for the animal welfare, because instead of the randomly doing the mouse trial on one cancer type, they can base on this information and select the model meet their screening criteria. That's mean from the electronic level and narrow down what model they can testing. So that's also played an important role in terms of the animal welfare and also in terms of the save clients cost. So now I'd like to go through how, as a CRO in China, how we do the lab animal work. And literally, the program we follow both local guidance and global guidance. For local and all the animal work was governed by the China Science and Technology Commission. This is a national level, and under that, for each province, they have the subsidiary and directly belong to this national level China Science Technology Commission. So specifically, when we in Shanghai, so it's the Shanghai, those Science and Technology Commission, they issue the lab animal permit. So they have a very stringent requirement for the hardware animal facility. Only after their full evaluation, they offer those permit. Only if you got those permit, you were allowed to order the lab animal. Without those permit, you cannot order the lab animal. And for those kind of the local permission, they more focus on the hardware thing, and also for the software part, we may more follow on the North American US and the standard, and also refer some to EU standard, because some of the client, they have the practice as both US and the EU. Specifically is the 8th condition of guide for the care and use of a lab animal. I believe they have for North American also major follow on those. And we have been like 3 animal facility has been for 10 years. We all ALEC are credit. So every 3 years they do the revisiting, and we kind of follow their standard. And we are also one of the first one get the scientific.com verified. And so that's our kind of certificate and the daily practice. So the outline in those, the whole animal welfare thing is governed by the institutional animal care and use committee, and stand for ICOOC. So the ICOOC responsible for all the study protocol review, and we also carry the semi-annual evaluation, and we have all the policy and the documentation, and ensure is a compliance with the guide, and both local and globally. And also we follow the policy AWRs, and carry out the staff training, and make sure our all facility is fully accredited. And specifically, we have talked about in those a few aspects. First, in the management level and oversight, then the animal environment and the housing, and what we carry out the veterinary care, and also like our physical plant. So first, the management and the oversight, and we kind of the program ICOOC is responsible for this the whole program implementation, and we also have those on-site attending event. We carry many training and also continue education training. Also carry out those EHS training. And for the program, like the ICOOC, like we totally have 18 of ICOOC guidelines, and we developed 10 of a veterinary service and animal husbandry SOP. We have a 29 animal facility operation related guideline, have 24 of other related SOP and guidelines. So for the animal environment, and those mandatory high hardware requirement, and by the ILEC, so we all follow those procedure. And the small animal mouse, we actually cage in this kind of cages, and the maximum for one cage we put 4 to 6 animals. We also put those enrichment including like nesting the material has those wooden block, and also cardboard shelter for the our lab animal. All the animal food and was bedding and water was provided by a certified local vendor. We also carry out those testing periodically. This is from Pony, is certified third-party testing. And also for the dead animal and the waste proposal, we have to send through local government certified third party to doing this kind of the disposal. And our environment, both the floor and also air environment and the ceiling and the walls, we all carry out the routine disinfection. So, and also like third part is the veterinary care. First, the animal procurement and the transportation, and we all the animal is come from a certified third party vendor. Those are major. We use the vendor. Once we got the animal, we carry out adaptive observation. All have the quarantine procedure and the stabilization before that can enter into the animal husbandry room. And we also carry out those packaging testing, follow the national standard, and the whole is specific for the China, so-called specific pathogen free, and that's the China have the clear like list what we need to test. And most important is we have a very strong sanitary animal program. So for each cage, we actually put in 2 sanitary animal for every around 50 to 80 cages. Then we transfer those bedding from those experimental cages of the animal to put those sanitary cage, and we keep them for 3 months and submit that for the health surveillance testing. And so we are routinely running many of those testing. If we found something weird behavior on the animal, and then we're going to carry out the full testing, and to make sure our facility is in ILAC approved environment. So when we carry out the experiment, and we naturally need to doing some procedure. So it's very, especially for ICAC, they very emphasize, and we need to have those program to evaluate the pain and the distress of the animal. So we put in the category C and D on a different level, and the majority procedure is fall into the category C, for example, the routine blood collecting, and also the dosing by garage, IP, IV, and sub-C. And if for some the procedure, we need to, at the end of the study, some client ask for the cardiac blood extraction, and also using some isotopic model. For those things, we fall into the category D. Then for those, we're going to go to the anesthesia and analgesia. So use those also the region that we've already used. For blood collection, we typically is collected from the submandibular vein process in the mice for the blood collection. This is less pain for the mass. And we also have a guideline in terms of the how many blood we can collect for each mice, and also after the single collection, how long was the duration we need to give the animal for the recover. So sometimes like a client and the protocol, if it's different from our guideline, we're going to discuss with our client and make sure they follow our standard. And the physical plan that we have majorly for the CRO business, we're using one is at the Shanghai Lidi, one is at the Xian Lidi. We all have is ILAC accredited. In Shanghai facility, we have a 25,000 cages capacity, and in Xian Lidi is around 1,500 capacity. So the feature of our facility, each facility we build as the study suite. That means in each study unit, we have the lab procedure unit that are equipped with the BLT safety hood. And then inside the inner chamber is the house boundary room. Instead of putting the one procedure room at the end of the facility, when you're doing the procedure, you need to travel whole facility. In case some of the room have the problem, then that's going to be affect the whole facility. So in order to overcome those problems, we building as the study suite, and each is the individual ventilation. So for those, we can take turns to doing the kind of disinfection for each unit. So that's guaranteed with our facility in a very highest clinics standard. So for those, all the two facility was building in this study suite. Some of the big clients, they routinely running their study asking for very high standard animal. So they also have the flexibility. They can book the whole unit. So we can use those whole unit dedicated for one specific client, follow their requirement to get the animal for their defined vendor, and also carry out the study and using one dedicated unit. So some of the big clients, they prefer to running that way. We also make that available. And physical plant also we have the heating and the ventilation, the air condition, and those are the power and the lighting and the system and the malfunction. Make sure we have the reporting system, and that's some of the picture. That's the cages, high density cages we use, and also that's our corridor. And in China, they more offers on the hardware in the facility. It's very difficult to get the local government's certificate if you're building a single corridor facility. So all our facility major trying to make is the double corridor if space available. So for we also have those emergency response program, and all the room was have people like on site for 24 hours, 7 days, and the security civilian monitor system is all linked to people's cell phone, and so make sure like we always have the people on site to taking care of the animals. So as I mentioned, our whole facility was fully ILAC accredited. So we on our daily practice, we most is followed this North Americans guideline, and also for some of the EU guidelines, because some client is European client, and we implemented those our patented mini PDX both at the clinic with a fresh patient sample for personalized oncology, as well as using the PDX model as the starting material to doing those screen, and that serve as the intermediate between the in vitro assay and the in vivo assay, so that significantly reduce the cost of the animal and the number of the animal. So that's follow the 3R principle, and because of those work, we got those 3R award on the 2021. So pretty much using the LIDI as the example to give you the idea in China, CRO and doing the international business, have many global clients, and how we operate and how we doing the daily practice, follow the highest animal welfare standard, and also follow both the legislation, both locally and globally. So with that, and I close my presentation here, and happy to take the questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wen. Before we get to our Q&A, I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit more information about a regional comparison. And again, all of this information is going to be available in a comprehensive suite of materials that will be available after the webinar series wraps up. So please don't feel concerned about the amount of text on the screen or worry about writing anything down. So the first comparison is just the framework. For each country, there is a different basis for the regulation, and you'll notice that Australia specifically has the state and territorial laws that are the kind of most significant. Canada has the criminal code, and similarly in the United States, we kind of have a more of a response to wrongdoing in the Animal Welfare Act than necessarily an outline of what is the best practice. However, some other countries do actually outline that more in their regulation. Specifically, Mexico really outlines things in that legislation. And again, China, India, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan also have the local and federal legislation, but again, the federal kind of trumps everything in these cases. So the guidance documentation is also a little bit different, and you'll notice that the issuing body, I included that as well because I thought it was a really interesting point here. So in some places, it's more of a council. So in Canada, Australia, in the US, of course, with the National Research Council, it's more of a nonprofit, non-government organization that's in charge of that. Whereas some of the other organizations or other countries are the guidance is issued by the government itself. So the Ministry of Science and Technology in China, that committee that I mentioned in India, which is part of the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change. In Japan, it's from the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology. So quite a few things in that ministry. And again, Mexico comes back to the Secretary of Agriculture, kind of similar to where the US relies on the USDA for some of the oversight. However, again, the guidelines in some places are published by a council rather than by a official government body, although they may be given certain powers by the government to create those guidelines. The legislative scope is also something that I found to be really interesting, and I mostly just included this because the US seems to be the only one that really excludes anything. So again, birds, rats of the genus Rattus, mice, and then some cold-blooded animals are excluded from the legislation. It doesn't mean that they're not in the guidance that is offered by the guide, obviously, but they're not specifically protected by legislation. Australia also has some limited definition of vertebrates other than humans or fish, but not many. Specifically, I thought the most interesting examples are those that are more broad. So for China, animal includes any mammal, bird, reptile, amphibian, fish, or any other vertebrate or invertebrate, whether wild or domesticated, which is a pretty wide scope. But India goes farther, where animal means any living creature other than a human being. And I don't think you can get much more simple, but also inclusive than that. New Zealand does a similar thing, but just really lays it out in very specific language. So their animals are any live man or a live member of the animal kingdom that are mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, whether bony or cartilaginous. That was one of my favorite specifics, or any octopus, squid, crab, lobster, or crayfish. And they also say that they can add any other member of the animal kingdom that can be declared by the governor general by order in the council to be an animal for the purposes of this act. So they leave room to amend it. And they also include mammalian fetuses, avian or reptile kind of pre-hatched young, and those that are in the last half of their gestation or development. So really including marsupial pouched young, which obviously is important in a place like that, but it does specifically not include human beings or any animal that is kind of larval or in those developmental stages. The ethical review is just slightly different in each country as well. So you can see Australia and New Zealand are kind of the same with having the AECs. In Canada, obviously the Animal Care Committee, IACUCs or similar are used in a few places as well, US, South Korea, China, and then Japan, and India has the IAEC. So there's a few differences in the nomenclature, but they have really similar makeups and really similar jobs and responsibilities. So I didn't outline the different specific makeup because they all come from the same kind of different groups of people that you would expect to be in an IACUC. There are also a lot of practical indications to go into, which we don't necessarily have time to get into today, but things like caging are really important to pay attention to. So in some areas, the caging is outlined carefully in legislation, such as in the EU. It actually has like the sizing and things. And in some places, the law just references another guide. So for example, Canada references the CCAC guide. New Zealand actually references the guide, the one that we're familiar with for ALAC and in North American use, and it references the CCAC guide. So it's interesting to see how legislation can be made to adapt quickly by referencing these other guidances and regulations that can be updated really quickly, but it also does sometimes leave some gaps in enforcement and things like that. I'm just going to try to wrap this up really quickly and explain to you how we at scientist.com apply these standards. So we have a due diligence suite of tools that range in a variety of areas. Obviously for animal welfare, that requires the RFI and the Verify program that Dr. Wen mentioned. So there are a specific suite of tools that you can use to kind of access where or restrict or control, I guess, where your researchers are buying from, but also give them that quick access. So it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but because we can help you with your due diligence and kind of guide researchers, I like to think of it as putting bumpers on a bowling lane. So we get them headed down the right path just a lot faster. We also have our animal welfare request for information, and we ask our in vivo suppliers to fill that out to tell us more about their policies and procedures. We review that, and then it's available to stakeholders at our clients. So obviously it's not available to just every researcher, and we wouldn't want you to have to kind of slog through this and decide what's appropriate for your organization and not. But our clients can use this to help inform their decision making. And we'll even ask for clarifications and submit a review documentation so you can see if there are ever concerns or just flags, things we want to highlight to you. You can use that information then to badge your suppliers. So you could review the animal welfare RFI and say, hey, this looks great. I'm going to mark them as evaluated. It'll give them a nice little green badge that says AW, and that allows each individual researcher to they can filter on that, and they can also just see it as a quick visual for them. So instead of going through the animal welfare RFI every time, they can just say, hey, this one has an animal welfare badge. I'm good to go forward and request something from them. Obviously, we can still have protocol-specific reviews, but we can also have things that happen when the request comes in. So if you want to always be notified if your researchers are using a higher severity grade, or maybe they want single housing, we can collect that information, we can customize this for you, and then add people and terms to it as needed. So if you always want Fred to know about any NHP studies, for example, we can set that up as a workflow. And then we can also ask the supplier questions at the proposal stage. So Dr. Wen might be familiar with this. We'll ask you if there's live animals involved, how many you're using and how many are expected to be euthanized, and are you transporting them? And we can even ask very specific questions, like if you want humane endpoints. So this is a great way to build in your organizational requirements into the system quickly and easily. This is one of my favorite things to work on with people, and that sounds a little strange, but we definitely like to make this compliance process easy and quick. We can also customize who approves and looks at things. So for example, if you're working in Asia Pacific and you want someone that's really specific or knows specifically those regulations, we can set that up so that if a study is going there or coming from a user in that region, whatever it is, we can assign approvers based on it. Basically, any information that goes into the system can be used to determine who should look at a study and decide if it's okay to move forward. So I would be happy to tell you so much more about that if you'd like. I can be reached obviously pretty easily. There's the handout available as well. And then Dr. Wen and I would also like to make ourselves available to you for questions. So thank you to those of you who have submitted your Q&A in the panel there so far. And I will go ahead and start reading some of these questions. So someone was asking, are there any differences in local governments, legislation, and US and EU regulation and laws? And there absolutely are. So it's really interesting to see in some of these situations how legislation is built and whether it references specific standards in the legislation itself or it references a guide. So it's really important to pay attention to not only the federal framework that you're working under, but also any regional frameworks. And I can definitely get into that in more detail at some point, and we might do like a white paper or something like that. But I can definitely also tell you that if you are outsourcing studies, that there's hopefully someone in your organization that's familiar with that area. And if not, that's something that we are also happy to help you find resources for. So after the series is concluded again, I am happy to produce a list of references and resources with links for you so that you can reference any specific laws or regulations. And we'll also do some comparisons, so side-by-side comparison of things like caging size or other things. Hi, Dr. Wen, it's great to see you back. Could you speak more to your experience with the Verify program especially during COVID-19, because that was when it was very difficult for organizations to actually come to your facility in China.
Sure. So like since we have many international clients, they typically send their own van to do the on-site inspection, and those are before the COVID-19. And during the COVID-19, it's very difficult to travel, so a lot of company they kind of cannot really make the trip, and by that time, scientists.com were able to offer those verified program. So they like I believe could overcome a lot of difficulty really sending the people on site to both our Shanghai and the Xi'an facility, did the on-site inspection, and later get that verified. So some of our big pharma client, then they just use scientist.com to verify to can be as the qualification to continue their study here. So it's like especially in that difficult time, verify played a very important role. And on those to get the local CRO can be verified and make sure they follow the highest international standard, and that enable the client can continue their study, because some of the big pharma, they have a very stringent code. Without this verification, they cannot really continue any study. So for those, and really appreciate scientist.com's effort. And we are the one of the first one to get this verified. So, and glad to have this opportunity, and looking forward to continue working with scientist.com.
Excellent. It's wonderful working with you too. I think we'll just do one more question and then we'll wrap this up. And if you had a question that was unanswered, we can certainly email you, and we'll be sharing more of our Q&A questions as well in the resources. So Dr. Wen, I understand that you have a trial database. Can you talk about how you use that to promote the 3Rs when you're conducting pharmacology studies?
Sure. Like this PMED trial database, we actually open that to all our client free of charge, and that information, including the all the characterization of those PDX model. We have 1,900 of the PDX model. Then have a whole exon sequencing and RNA-seq, and also the pathology data and the growth curve, and also some SOC data, and most important, many of that associated with the clinical treatment history and the clinical follow-up. So when client and trying to using those PDX model to support their program, it's important to select the right model. Of course, there are client early stage, and they using the strategy. See, I have a drug candidate for gastric cancer. Then I just using the old gastric cancer 200 or something PDX to run the mouse trial. So that's one way. And also, many cases, people begin to select, for example, if they're working on the ADC drug, they would like to, based on the RNA-seq data and IHC data, to select the high expression, low expression, and no expression on a specific target. For example, Claudin 18.2, TROP2, whatever. So they using those databases, they can get in that information, and immediately, instead of randomly pick up the sample to the model to doing the study, maybe need to enroll a lot of animal. And in those cases, first you can use the database electronically to narrow down what is the model fit for your study. So I think the application of those PMED trial database first facilitate clients searching, and also they can kind of promote the 3R principle. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Wen. We're going to go ahead and wrap that up, and we will try to follow up with you if you had individual questions following the series. And please feel free to get in touch with scientist.com or Lidi at any time, and we'd be happy to help you. Thanks again for joining us this evening, and have a wonderful week.